You think you could summon Tyler by saying like bang 3 times?
Bang, bang, bang.
Bang, bang, bang!
Alright.
Hey, Professor, what's that on your shoe?
This is a frog.
Cool.
Is it gay?
Yes.
Hell yes!
Congratulations!
We gotta fucking get it now.
Keep your head up, King, your crown's falling.
So today we're going to do a lecture on the one and only Lobster Don, Jordan Peterson.
Woo!
Now, I'm going to be honest for a second. I didn't know how to start this lecture. I spent 2 hours pacing around my room trying to figure it out. Because to say Jordan Peterson is a meme would not do him justice. To say that he's one of the smartest people I've ever listened to would not do him justice. To say that he's a horrific whirlwind of conservative nightmare would not do him justice. So we're going to start in the same place the world started with this man. Mid-2017, Canada was passing something called the C-16 bill. Now, this was a bill that would require you legally to respect people's pronouns. So, if you refuse to use someone's preferred pronouns, that would be considered harassment, and you could serve actual jail time for this. Yes.
That wasn't what C-16 was for. It was it was specifically for you couldn't reject someone from getting an apartment building because of their gender identity.
I believe it was a complex bill, but that was the part that was really heavily discussed.
Okay.
I mean, legal bills have a lot of Christmas tree stuff in it, and I don't understand the intricacies of Canadian policy law, although I did watch the entire court hearing on this. So, obviously, this was a big culture war thing, because this is writing right off Gamergate, okay? That is the attitude on the internet right now. Yeah. And so, inherently, you're going to have a law that is nice to trans people, so you're going to have big figures stepping out on both sides of the aisle giving their big spiels about it. And Jordan Peterson, at first, was just one of these people. He was a professor at Yale who moved back to Canada. He taught psychology, and he had 2 doctorate degrees, right? And Jordan Peterson taught at Harvard. Not Yale, Harvard. Just wanted to clear that up. And he had 2 doctorate degrees, right? And he went to court and said exactly what you'd expect a conservative figurehead to say. This is an example of the left being fascist and restricting our speech, and we are heading to communism and hell, and this is bad. And so, what do you do with these people? You put them on the news cycle, right? You put them on some conservative talk shows, and they all jack each other off about how great free speech is and how the left is evil. And then you put them on some left talk shows, and they all talk about, look how transphobic you are, you're so intolerant. Everybody pats themselves in the back, everybody has a good time, the news cycle continues. That's what's supposed to happen, right? Jordan Peterson didn't really fall into this because he was kind of too weird and too smart. So, to give you some background, this is a cognitive psychologist and an evolutionary psychologist. 2 doctoral degrees he worked really hard for in these advanced fields. He also has a background in political science. Back when the Soviet Union went at its height, he took a tour around Europe writing a paper on trying to figure out why fascism took hold in Europe, and this is what he studies and obsesses on. So he comes up to the stand and says, look, this bill is requiring people to speak in a certain way with large ideological connotations, and in addition to serving jail time, you will have to take a test that shows your hidden biases, and he says this looks a lot like re-education, and this just has really bad vibes. On the conservative talk shows, no. In the conservative talk shows, they would try to get him to say stuff like trans people aren't valid, and he'd be like, no, of course they are. Are you stupid? I have trans students, and I will always respect their pronouns. What I'm against is this compelled speech, and Christian conservative news felt weird about that. Then he would say weirder shit, like, so God isn't necessarily real. I don't believe in God the way you believe in God. What's important is the symbol of Jesus Christ, which is really a neurological thing. It's archetypally rooted in our brains. And I worship that God, but that God is actually literally God, but it's also evolved within us. And it would take 40 hours to explain a literal quote, and people are like, what the hell are you talking about? He went in front of the Senate and said, you know what? On surface level, this is good, trans rights, humans right, but I don't like the implications this has for how our society is conceiving of the concept of identity. Because the Western society has a set condition of what individualism means, and by shifting the locality of meaning from group identity or from individual to group identity is matching these different civilizations throughout history. And the senator literally stopped him and said, "Sir, we're talking about a trans rights bill. Please stop. Please give short and concise answers."
Wait,
So-
isn't he Canadian?
Yes.
Yes.
So why was he commenting on an American?
This was a-
thing?
Canadian.
Oh,
Canadian
okay,
Senate.
never mind.
And also American politics are pretty big around the globe.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So, as you can see, he's saying some weird stuff and people had a lot of trouble putting him into a box. So they would cut him off in the middle of these interviews and people were curious, like, what is this madman saying? So they went to his YouTube channel, right?
There's YouTube.
Yes.
He had a YouTube channel for years.
I don't know why that's so funny to me.
Because he's a professor and he would just tape his classes, full classes, and upload them to YouTube. Like a lot of teachers do, right?
Yeah.
And these classes had no views. Because he literally talks like I'm posting these links on Blackboard so you can re-watch them for study purposes.
Yeah.
But because he had hours and hours of content explaining what he believed and why in a very academic and cohesive way in which he could not be interrupted, all of a sudden people had access to what exactly this guy was saying when he was being cut off on the news. So it became very easy for people to sink their teeth into it and for him to get big. So let's talk about what was on his YouTube channel. So he has a bunch of different lecture series. He did a bunch of different classes, but they all boil down to the basic same two concepts. The first is the history of philosophy from a psychological perspective. Now, what does that mean? I'll give you a great example. So he's giving a lecture on existentialism, right? And he starts by talking about the psychoanalysts. The psychoanalysts are people like Freud. And their big claim is that the reason people are maladaptive and messed up is because they experienced trauma in their childhood, right? Mm-hmm. And in order to fix yourself, you need to revisit these childhood traumas and work through it and be honest with yourself, and that's how you move forward and become a well-adjusted adult. Existentialism is a philosophical school of thought that says life is inherently traumatizing. You are finite in the face of infinity. That's just what existence is. You are born fighting an undefeatable foe, which is death, which will cause you immense suffering, and then you will fucking die, and there is nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
And that is horrifying. And there is an infinity of time before you and an infinity of time after you, and you were living in a really small spot. And it is kind of nihilistic, but it's really just explaining how existence is inherently horrifying, and you have to deal with that. So he goes on to say, from the existentialist perspective then, psychoanalysis is stupid because they say the way to avoid trauma and become a well-adjusted adult is to have a healthy childhood. And they're saying there's no such thing as a healthy childhood. Everybody is traumatized because life will traumatize you. No matter how good your life is, you will be fucked up. And obviously some trauma is worse than others, but you will have things that happened when you were young that will fuck you up for your entire life, no matter where you are. And this is a very different perspective in how you treat people. Because then the question isn't, why is this person anxious and depressed? Because from the existentialist perspective, Jordan Peterson claims, everybody is baseline anxious and depressed. Your brain is literally wired to be anxious because anxious keeps you alive. Mm-hmm. Anxious keeps you looking around for the fucking lion that's going to jump and eat you.
Yeah.
And being anxious is better than being dead, but being anxious also kind of sucks. Mm-hmm. So the question is, why aren't humans always anxious and depressed? And to explain why, he talks about a really famous experiment done by B.F. Skinner, who's a behavioralist. Yes?
So anxious keeps you alive, but what does depressed do?
He doesn't really go into that.
Okay.
He talks a lot more about anxiety.
Okay.
So there's this famous experiment that's supposed to prove that psychoanalysis is valid. So what they do is they take this rat and they put it in a cage, and for its entire life it just sits in this cage, right? And as a result, it never experiences pain or hunger. They feed it, and the rat is calm. It sits there and looks well adjusted, it's happy, it moves around, and isn't scared. Then one day out of nowhere, they shock it. Ever since they shocked it, the rat has been paranoid. It runs around the cage, it does not look safe at any point. And it said, look, we caused pain to the rat, that was trauma, and now the rat is damaged. Same neurological thing that a human, it's the same thing on a micro scale. And Jordan Peterson says that's a psychoanalyst perspective, what happened in that experience. From an existentialist perspective, what happened was, the rat was already scared and paranoid. The second they put it in the cage, the first thing it did was it stood there and learned that this is a place a rat can stand and not die. Then it smelled scenarios, kind of looked at each corner and learned that there was nothing there that was about to kill it. And once it made sure there was nothing there going to kill it, it knew it was safe, and then it acted like a calm rat. When they shocked it, all of a sudden there is pain from a source that it cannot identify, which means that the place it is in is not safe and it doesn't understand why. And that causes anxiety, and that is why the rat was not well adjusted. So that's just an example of the type of thing he does.
Okay.
You need to understand that existentialism is not saying this at all. Existentialism is a philosophical school of thought designed to inspire poetry. Okay? But what's really cool about this series is because when I studied philosophy from like 13 to 17, I looked at it from an art history perspective. As you guys probably know from my earlier lectures, what I really find interesting about art analysis is looking at how the art is a reflection of the person who made it. I think that's really interesting. Or how what loving art says about you, like what the Fight Club fandom means in a socio-political way. That's what interests me. And to understand, 1 second.
Oh, can I say?
I'll get.
Oh,
Go
get to
ahead,
it.
go ahead.
Okay. Have you played the beginner's guide yet? Basically, the game is about exactly what you're describing. So
I have not. But anyways, that is what interests me. That's why I study philosophy from an art history perspective. Because to learn about what different artists in the 1600s were saying and thinking, you need to understand the philosophies of the time, and that's what motivated me to learn. So to listen to these and listen to philosophy from a much more practical therapy perspective, like how do these philosophies reflect on how we help people from being miserable? It was a completely different perspective and meaning of what these things are about. And that kind of changes how you look about these things. Just because this is going to come up later, Jordan Peterson does not really have an agenda with this class. He says shit about postmodernism every once in a while, but there's no like cohesive message or oeuvre you get by listening to these lectures. It is literally just explaining every major philosophical movement in Western history from a, how can I use this to help patients recover in therapy? And of course this is the perspective he has, because he's a psychology teacher. He works as a professional therapist outside of his university job. So this is just the mindset he has. But he speaks about it as if this is what these philosophers mean. And so for the people who only know about these philosophers because of Jordan Peterson, sometimes they have a really warped view of what these people are saying. But overall, great course, right? Next thing, the next type of course you'll find on his YouTube channel is the history of mythology from a psychological perspective. Now this is arguing that, so human beings are the way they are because we biologically evolved over a very long period of time. A lot of the ways our society is set up is to accommodate for what we are as animals. We'll talk way more about this, but that's the basic idea, right? Well, our stories also evolved. Because as we got older, there was a lot of truths inherent about us in our brain that we couldn't understand because we didn't have cognitive science, so we wrote stories. And even though the people writing the stories didn't understand what they were saying, we knew these things were true, and that's why you get the same archetypes showing up all across the world. To give you a concrete example of this, the dragon is always sitting on gold. Or he's guarding a virgin princess, right? Why the fuck is a dragon capturing a princess? The dragon is not going to fuck the princess, right? Different species.
Or are they?
I was like,
Never say
I don't
never.
know, man. Depends what you're watching.
Right? So why does this keep happening? Why does the dragon keep capturing the woman? Well, it's because, according to Jordan Peterson, we started out as prey animals, right? We evolved from prey animals who were used to being hunted. So the thing in the brain that says predator is the same thing that evolved. We still have that same circuitry in our head. Back then, everything unknown had to read as predator because we had to be scared, because we had to run, because that's how we survived, right? And we didn't lose that neurological framework. So our brain is wired to look at the unknown as predator. It's the same circuits that light up. So anything unknown and new is scary. However, human beings really got as far as we were because we overcame that inherent biological desire. Example he keeps bringing up is fire. So fire is scary and you don't want to go near it. But once we did go near it, we learned how to cook. And once we learned how to cook, we were able to get the calories we needed a lot faster. And human civilization begins to grow big. We see larger tribes the second we start finding evidence of people controlling fire. That's because when people have more nutrition, they spend less of their time looking for food and things work out better. So human beings, The reason we succeed is because we can overcome our biological desire to be scared of what is scary and we don't understand. So the dragon is inside of us. The dragon is the unknown that we're programmed to be scared of. And it's always guarding treasure because the way in which we get things that are worthwhile is by confronting that which is scary. Yes.
So the bad dragon is inside of us.
So that is one of the simpler arguments he makes, but that just gives you an idea of what the that's a dildo company. Yeah, I know. History of psychology, or history of mythology from psychological lenses like. A few other really cool examples he brings up is, why did so many civilizations sacrifice babies to their gods? Why do we see this happening over and over again all across the planet?
Because they can't scream. They can't scream for help.
Here's why. For a lot of human history, we could only have tribes that were so big, right?
Yeah.
And when we have a good year and human population grows, all of a sudden that's not a sustainable number because we had to keep it around like 300, 400 until we started really getting into agriculture. So the way we understood that is we had to sacrifice babies because we needed to keep the population down.
Yes.
That is a harsh reality. And that is one I'm very glad we don't live in. And that's one Jordan Peterson said humans are just not going to admit to themselves. So we came up with stories of gods who we needed to do terrible things for in order to keep the greater good going. We had to sacrifice these children in order for food and fertility. It's a pretty clear link, and that's why this story keeps happening. He goes through the entire Bible.
I've never heard it put that way, but that.
Yeah.
He goes through the entire Bible like this, and through a lot of classic stories, and it's very interesting. Okay, so this is what was on Jordan Peterson's YouTube channel. Now that you have all of this context, we can finally start moving towards what Jordan Peterson actually believes. To do that, we're going to have to talk about the three most influential philosophers on him. We're going to start with Carl Jung. Carl Jung was a student of Freud's. And Carl Jung was the whole person who came up with this idea that human truth is embedded in our mythology. He's where Joseph Campbell got it, he's where Dawkins got it, he's where George Lucas got it. He wrote about this whole everything being embedded, right? Carl Jung, by the end of his life, gets a little crazy about it. Because he starts saying every religion is literally true. Because every religion is just examples of these biological truths put in complex ways. And those things literally are God. It's the same thing. We just conceive of it differently. But the truth within you is God. Does that make vague sense?
Yes.
That's spicy.
Then, here's where he gets a little iffy in my book. He starts explaining all world religions to the people who believe them. And you really get the sense he's like, all religions are true only when they conform to what I'm saying.
Oh, God.
Oh.
Carl Jung.
Edward Elric type beat.
Yeah. Carl Jung has a lot of really wise things to say, though. He's the whole one that talks about, like, your deepest treasure lies within your deepest cave.
Aww.
So you need to figure out, like, what scares you the most,
Cave.
and then
Is it the dragon?
the merit.
They keep looking at each other and saying.
He also has this really interesting concept of ideas. People don't have ideas, ideas have people. Ideas are active entities in our lives, and if you don't watch out for them, the idea will possess you. That's where demon possession comes from, and
Ew.
control your life.
That's crazy.
Yes,
The battery thing is blinking red.
that's bad.
Yeah.
So this is where demon possession comes from, according to
Okay.
Jung. Ideas literally possess you. For example, let's say you are super Christian, right? You start out as a person with a friend group and a family, and you find sources of meaning from all different places. The idea possesses you, and slowly you try to conform your existence to the idea. You didn't have this idea. This idea is older. You probably don't know where these things originally came from. And these ideas are circulating around, and you have to look out for them, right? Carl Jungian idea. He also has this cool idea about the dark side. So he kind of believes in all of human having the same subconscious. Because he believes these myths literally evolved, and they're actually in our brain, in our subconscious. We're naturally designed to drift toward certain stories because something within us knows that they're true, and it fulfills like a psychological need. So we have this collective unconscious we can tap into.
No, that's literally persona.
Persona got everything from Young.
Yeah, I know.
Do you guys understand that? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yes.
Okay, so he believes all of humanity has the same demon because in a weird way we're the same person. And that same demon is the demon that causes us to murder hundreds of people. It causes the Holocaust. People who are very bad are not bad because they go down a path that is different. They have the same thing in them that you have. And in order to reach Carl Jung's version of enlightenment, you need to confront the part in you that is a person who commits atrocities and enjoys it. Because that is you. Because you are horrible. And that is not the part of you that thinks it would be really funny to shoot up a school because you like thinking of horrible things.
Wow.
That's the part of you that makes the people around you suffer when you feel bad. When you feel upset and resentful and so you make the people around you their lives worse, that's the demon in you. That is the thing that leads to atrocity after atrocity, because horrible things come from people who are not in good places. That's Jung's big thing. Yes.
Oh, you already answered my question with I forgot what it was already, but you answered what I was saying.
Okay, this is probably the easiest philosopher I went over yet. Is everyone on the same page?
Yeah.
Nietzsche!
Now we're going to talk about Nietzsche.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, the sheep.
Are you ready to get anti-Semitic up in this house?
No! Wait!
No!
That came out of nowhere!
Not we don't practice, but yeah.
Okay. Frederick Nietzsche wrote a lot.
Makes sense.
He is not the kind of person who can distill all of his beliefs into a hour-long Shaka University lecture, so I'm not going to try. I'm only going to talk about his most famous claims in the one that really influenced Jordan Peterson. So, this does not give you the right to talk about Nietzsche on Reddit, okay?
Thank you.
Alright. Nietzsche's big thing is that God is dead.
Okay.
Nice! We started off good.
Because
He should.
the reason he believes God is dead is because a fundamental value in Christianity is truth.
Mm-hmm.
Truth will set you free. Jesus is the light and the truth. You are supposed to value honesty and facts no matter what. That is why when the Reformation happened and people were actually allowed to read the Bible, we saw a massive uptick in science. Because the values of people changed from Catholic dogma to what was in the scriptures. And the scriptures was go out there and observe the world and do science. There's very much that edge in the New Testament, which a lot of people don't like to talk about. So, we followed that path, and a lot of people found it really hard to believe in God once we had more compelling reasons to explain how the world came to be. We came up with evolution, and people were like, we don't need God to explain why things exist, right? So Nietzsche was like, Christianity is a self-defeating religion. People are no longer believing in God, and so God, as a concept that we created, is dead.
Damn.
That makes sense. That's pretty simple, right?
That's fucking wild.
He believed that Okay. So human beings are designed to be goal-oriented, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When you come up with a goal in mind, your perception of the world literally works around that goal.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why people who don't know what they want tend to feel very aimless, and depression is often associated with that, because your brain isn't moving in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
There is a more medical explanation of how this happens, but this is the thing. So Nietzsche is saying that Christianity gave the entire Western world kind of the same goal, the same value structure, right? And now that we all kind of were able to admit that it was all bullshit, again, this is according to Nietzsche, I'm a big Christian, that's not what this is about. Anyways, according to Nietzsche, because we're finally able to give up this religious structure, we're going to encounter nihilism. Because all of a sudden we realize that we don't have to do anything. We don't have to believe anything. We don't have to follow any morals to get what we want. Everything is meaningless. And he says, this could be bad. Because once we realize that there is no outside structure defining what we need to do, we're going to start coming up with our own shit. And the structure we've been provided with is deeply flawed. Nietzsche hated Christianity. We'll get into why later. But it was a structure that was very old, and it worked. Right? The morals of Christianity kept people functioning in a way that kept society running good enough to keep everyone alive. Right? Once we start making up our own shit, we don't have these ancient wisdom things to guide us. We're just kind of going off of the cuff, and bad things are going to happen. So, the reason he didn't like Christianity.
Try it.
No, see that he's gonna keep his arms crossed.
Fuck you. The reason he doesn't like Christianity, right? So he believes there's something called master ideas and slave ideas. A master idea is an ideology that gets you off your ass going out to the world to dominate things. Because power is good. And people who don't admit that power is good pretend it's because of their morals, but it's because they're fucking cowards. Of course you want power over other people. That's inherently obvious. Having people do what you tell them to do is something you enjoy. That's why people fall for it. That's why kings exist. Because it's fun and good and you want it. Yes.
Is this why you're in charge of Shaka University?
Exposed!
Oh man.
And their Christian morality came from Judaism, right?
Yup.
Judaism to Christianity, very direct link. Jesus was a Jew.
Yup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jews were an ethnic group that have been conquered their entire history. Right? There is no point in history in which the Jewish people have not been fucked.
That's
Yeah.
rough.
Huh?
Yeah.
Their civilization flourishes for 50 years, and then the Babylonians take them over, and then the Assyrians take them over, and then the Greeks take them over, and then the fucking Romans take them over, and then there's fucking Nazis, okay?
And then there's fucking Nazis.
Things do not go well for these people.
No,
These are people who
that's a
are
little
unable
tangent right there.
to have master morality because their civilization is weak, right?
Yeah.
So what kind of morality do they develop? What is the moral core of this religion? Passivity is good. Forgiving your enemy is good. Power is bad. He says, where do these ideas come from? They come from people who are disempowered and weak and want to be powerful but can't be. And there's this cognitive dissonance.
Uh-oh.
So they come up with a moral structure that justifies being weak and submissive. This is
Submissive and free.
This is called slave morality. Hitler read a lot of Nietzsche and was very inspired by it.
When was he?
That's
when
nice.
was Nietzsche like active?
Mid 1800s. Nietzsche actually was never recognized in his life. His books only sold 50 copies in his lifetime. He was discovered after he was dead.
Okay.
So he never thought any of this shit would influence anyone. He was
So it
just
was like
writing.
just posting on his like his private account.
Yeah.
Damn, this the numbers.
So, obviously, Christian collapsing he thought was a good thing, right?
Yeah.
But there's problems, because it's going to lead us to nihilism. And that could be a bad thing, because once we come up with our own value structures, we might make up random shit in a mad scramble for power. There will be no central organizing system. Everyone will be at each other's throats, and a bunch of major societies are going to collapse.
Nice.
In fact, he predicted that in Europe, there were going to be large ideological movements that were going to take hold. There was going to be cult of personality figures being in charge, and they were going to give grand promises that they were going to restructure moral systems. And then those societies were going to collapse, and it was going to cause tragedy and poverty in Europe. Yes.
Wait, so Nietzsche was like all like, oh, people who are weak or stupid, but who was he? Like, was he like a leader? Was he like a
Was he submissive?
leader? Was
He was a...
Yeah, alpha,
Was he
sigma.
Yeah.
Was he
This is a
submissive and
sidetrack, but I'll
breathable?
get into it. Nietzsche was a child genius who was a professor at like 19 to 22. And then he got very, very ill and very, very sick early in his life and was in constant pain and could no longer teach because he was in so much pain.
So this is
So he lived in a house by a seaside where he just sat and tried to survive. Nobody listened to him, but he knew he was an unappreciated genius, so he wrote books while he was in pain and then died. And that was his life.
Yeah, that explains.
Okay, so at that point in his life, he was submissive because if you tried to fuck him, he couldn't stop you.
And how old was
I don't know.
he? Was he like 30s, 40s?
I'm gonna be
I'm
honest.
trying to ask if he's breathable or not.
well, anything is true.
Where are the eggs? Where are the eggs?
Whoa!
This is getting a little bit
He
too
died
much.
Whoa.
young. He was breathable. So anyways,
Trigger warning.
Nietzsche predicted that these ideologically driven movements were going to take hold in Europe, and look what happened in the 20th century. Nazism takes over,
Yep.
communism takes over,
Yep.
Germany collapses, Russia literally economically
Barely say that.
collapses. He kind of fucking called it. So what is Nietzsche's solution to this whole death of God thing?
Ezri.
No, okay.
His solution is something called the Superman.
Oh, yeah! Krypton.
This
Kal-El out
Superman
here.
comes from, which is why Superman has some really weird Nazi vibes to him.
Oh.
Really? But was it made by like 2 Jewish dudes?
Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Let's get into
Super.
this. So what is the Superman? He said, so we need something to worship and believe in, right?
Oh, boy.
Because we don't have God anymore. So he came up with this idea of the perfect individual. The person who is perfectly strong, perfectly smart, perfectly everything, and he is dominant. This is a person who wants something, goes and gets it, and no one can stop him because he's infinitely powerful. And he wanted us to basically make celebrities and pretend they were Superman and to worship this concept of the Superman. His Superman was very white, was very male, was very middle-aged, was very blue eyes, very blonde, and very German.
How funny.
Oh.
How quaint.
How?
Wait.
Which is why, when Superman was originally written, he was a villain.
What?
Really?
Dead
Holy
ass.
shit.
That's kind of cool, actually.
Bring it back.
It's fucking
Do it
alive
again.
and changed.
Do it again. Bring it back.
Bring it back.
Bring it back.
Nazi man.
Which is why Superman versus the Klan has some really weird mixed messages, but that's for another day.
Okay.
So that's Nietzsche, right? This ideology of replacing God with the Superman influenced Hitler a lot. And there's a very clear line between his writing and Nazis. Jordan Peterson does not address this.
What?
But it's very important to understand Nietzsche's ideology to understand Jordan Peterson's point. Does everybody have a good understanding of everything I explained about Nietzsche? Do these concepts make sense to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now we're going to talk about Solzhenitsyn.
You can pronounce that?
Yes.
Okay.
Solzhenitsyn is the only philosopher on this list that I haven't personally read. I've listened to Jordan Peterson talk about him, I've read a bunch of people talking about him, I've read wiki articles and watched YouTube videos, but I haven't read him firsthand, so take what I'm saying with a tiny grain of salt. Solzhenitsyn was a soldier in World War I and World War II. Not really by choice. Do you guys know anything about the rise of communism in Russia?
Nope.
I do.
Somewhat.
So, Russia was a ridiculously classist society. You know how Europe kind of had this like democratic revolution during the Enlightenment where they were like, you know what, America's pretty cool, fuck kings.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
didn't happen in Russia.
Oh.
Russia kind of modernized, but they basically still had a feudal system going up into the early 1900s. So there was a massive slave revolt when all the poor people were forced to fight in the middle of winter and die. And they revolted and instated socialist ideology. And they took all the money from the rich people by force. If you had a 2-story house, you were kicked out of it because you didn't deserve to live in a 2-story house when other people had 1-story houses. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Solzhenitsyn was a soldier in this. He was slightly wealthy, so he had everything taken from him, and he ended up being thrown into gulag. And so, he was very anti-communist because of this. And he wrote a book in which he essentially argued that mental illness doesn't just happen on the level of the individual. Mental illness happens on the level of the society.
Oh.
Society.
So, remember when Carl Jung says people don't have ideas, ideas have people? You have to think of ideas as living demons. Things that travel around the social mindscape, things that evolve and change over time that sometimes we don't fully understand and that can take control of people.
Yeah.
You've seen ideas that people don't understand completely possess them. So, like, this concept makes sense.
Yeah.
He says, when societies get rid of their basic mythological structure, the truths that have always been true in their society, the old stories, when they rewrite them and change myths intentionally to promote a man-made ideology. For example, socialism was constructed from the beginning. An intellectual named Karl Marx sat down and wrote his idea for how an economic system should work. Completely manufactured. When the Soviet system took over, they were very big in propaganda, right? They literally tried to change what colors you associated with what things. Mm-hmm. There was a big thing in socialist China, for example, where they were very upset that red meant stop in traffic lights. Because red was the color of communism, so that should be the color of progress. So they changed all of the traffic lights so red meant go.
Oh, so that's...
That didn't work very well, they changed it back.
Yeah,
But this
yeah,
is the kind of like symbolic rewiring they were trying to do, right? And he said that this, like, we have archetypes in us. They are biologically born, they are not from culture. That's why people all across the planet come up with very similar story structures. Humans like the same story because the same archetypes appeal to us because there's a truth inherent. When you start fucking with those archetypes and literally rewiring what people believe.
Can I have an example of some of the archetypes?
Like the archetypal male, like.
I'm trying to give you examples here.
Just whisper.
Then just starts naming off personas.
So you have the mentor, right?
Okay.
The mentor is the old man who has gone on his journey, and his job is to go to the young people and give them the push to the call of adventure. This is the father figure, right? The ideal father is somebody who, once their kid grows up, encourages them to leave and be independent and seek their own fortune. That is why the mentor always has to die in the end, because the mentor can't guide the hero the entire time. The mentor either has to die or leave. The mentor, when the hero refuses the call, right? The mentor is the one who says, you can't refuse the call, you need to go on the adventure.
Like Gandalf.
Like Gandalf. And then halfway through the adventure, he steps out. He's no longer there. So the mentor is the father. This is a thing we see in stories over and over again, and it's because this is a model for how parenting is supposed to work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or the concept of Oedipus, right? Why are we going here? Oedipus, you know, sir, he fucked his own mom, right?
Yeah. Just don't fuck with
Nice.
mom. Is that the point of him?
And the
So
point of
the
that
father-
is people who get too protected by their mom and like view their mom as their model of femininity and start having weird sexual feelings for them. This is a result of being coddled.
It's a real thing.
This is
Yeah. This is a result of being overprotected and not being able to go out and explore and have fun in the world and make your own path. This
And
is a
fuck
bad
somebody's
thing.
mom.
Fucking your own mom is representative of this, which is why whenever people get too close to their mom in classic myths, horrible stuff always happens to them.
Yep.
That is this archetype warning you of this thing that really happens in real family structures. Or, for example, why is the evil king almost always the uncle or dad of the main character? Part of this is because that's how monarchies really worked, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of it is also, a lot of dads, when people start growing up and are strong enough to fight their dad, get very tyrannical. This is a thing that happens throughout time.
Yeah.
So it's very good to have stories that teach people that their good father, as he got older, went mad and became the evil king. And you need to be able to stand up to that. So those are examples of archetypes, right? And Solzhenitsyn saying, when you start taking these archetypes and fucking with them, you change people's inherent value structures, things that are supposed to keep us in check. And entire societies will go mentally ill. Entire societies will completely ignore facts. Like, you know how there was socialist propaganda telling people they were well fed, even though they didn't have enough bread in the bread stores?
Yeah.
And then
Bread stores.
well, they would have stores where they would like hand people bread for free.
The
This was
bread
their ration,
lines.
right? Yeah, the bread lines. Thank you. And you would not get enough to live. So because it was Russia, and Russia's really hard to do socialism in because they don't have enough resources. Yeah. The alternative was some people had a lot and other people didn't have anything, and that was really fucked up. But you can't divide all of the wealth between everybody when there's not enough wealth to begin with. Right?
Yeah.
So things really didn't work out in Russia. It sucked. But people would report in very genuine interviews that at least they weren't like America because we had more food than them. They would go to American grocery stores. My grandma had this is hearsay, so take this for insult. My grandma had a friend who came over from the Soviet Union and pointed out that these grocery stores were suboptimal compared to their bread lines, because at least they weren't capitalist. So you have this like society level delusion. That's what societal mental illness is. When a bunch of people ignore the facts to fit the ideology because their entire value system is being rewired. And that, when people start doing that, entire societies collapse. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, the same thing happened with the Nazis. Once people just started believing that white people were inherently eugenically better, if everybody got on board with it, even though they really shouldn't have, and you get that. That's Solzhenitsyn's main arguments. His book, The Gulag Archipelago, was able to be published in the West. A lot of people stopped liking communism after this came out. It's a big reason why the Soviet Union fell, allegedly. Okay, now that we have discussed all of Jordan Peterson's main influences, we can finally talk about what Jordan Peterson himself actually believes. Do you guys kind of see how these ideas kind of play into each other already?
Yes.
When we talk about a philosopher, I think the best way to approach this is to look at their takes on the three big questions of philosophy. When you start studying philosophy, you'll learn that most philosophy can be stored into answering one of three questions. The first is the question of knowledge. How do we know anything is real? Because you can't figure out how you're supposed to act or what you're supposed to do when you don't know how you know things. You need a base of facts to start out with making decisions for the world, right? And humans are in this really weird spot where we can't really know anything for real. We can't know for sure we're not in the Matrix, right? So Jordan Peterson's answer to the question, how do we know things, is that he says, look, any perspective and idea could be true, right? You could believe anything, make any claim and say that's possible, and that is just as possible as any other claim you can make. And that puts us in a weird spot. But there are only so many interpretations of reality that won't result in you dying. So if you find a version of, if you find a philosophy that results in you not dying, that's probably a pretty good philosophy. That's probably one that fits the environment you're in. Beyond that, okay, well what else do you want from a mode of knowledge? You also want to see, if I believe this and act as if these things are true, do I get what I want? Can I use this belief structure to have a goal and then go out and do it? And if you are getting what you want because you believe the world works a certain way and you act according to that, and you do get what you want, that's a pretty good sign that your philosophy is in alignment with how things actually are. Now, it's possible you were in the Matrix. But if you have a philosophy that gets you the results you want in the environment you perceive to be in, then why does it matter? Now, if you are miserable and everything is suffering and you can't get anything you want, maybe you need to change your presuppositions of how the world works. So that's his, how do we come to know things? Next is government. How should we govern ourselves? Should there be a power higher than me? What do I want it to do? So, he has a big thing about hierarchies. A big critique the West has of itself right now is that we have a lot of power structures and hierarchies that they see as unfair. There are people at the top and there are people at the bottom, and that inherently sucks and we don't like it. But his point is, hierarchies are not a socio-political construction. Hierarchies are not something we made up. We could not just pretend they don't exist like we could with money. The reason is because, you know how theoretically humans evolved from lobsters?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
No. No, I don't know that at all.
Well, lobsters are really far back in our evolutionary chain, but at some point, your great-great-great-great-great-grandparents were fucking lobsters.
Okay.
Lobsters have something called a dominance hierarchy. There is a number 1 lobster and a number 10 lobster. And there are chemical differences in these lobsters. So let's say 2 lobsters are going to fight over who's going to get the mate, right? The lobster who wins gets serotonin released in his brain. Or not serotonin, I don't remember.
Happy lobster juice.
Happy lobster juice released in his brain. This changes how his posture is. This changes how strong he is. He's able to get stronger faster when these chemicals are running in him. And the lobster that is defeated doesn't get these chemicals. It gets chemicals that actually make it weaker. These chemicals cement its place in the hierarchy. Now, do you know what's really interesting? When you give defeated lobsters human antidepressants, they start taking on the characteristics of number 1 lobsters. They physiologically change. So Jordan Peterson's saying, look, hierarchies are part of what we are. That is biologically rooted in us. And you might not like it, but this is a reality. And fighting this will not be productive. Because hierarchies are still going to form. You're just not going to be conscious of how they form because you're lying to yourself about their non-existence. Yes?
So hierarchy comes from how happy people. So the happier people are on top. I lost something in this.
So in lobsters, hierarchies come from who is stronger and more able to reproduce.
Yeah,
right?
but the only chemical difference that you described is.
Well, it's a chemical that
happier.
makes you happy, but it's also a chemical that does a lot of other things. When you are a lobster who is strong and succeed, clearly you are a lobster that should fuck more so we can have more strong lobsters. Right?
So like testosterone.
The ultimate lobster.
The lobster with the build that is already succeeding is going to get chemicals that reward it so it keeps succeeding and takes on the characteristics of a lobster that's going to go out there and make more. The lobsters who are suboptimal and who are not winning
It
have
gains more confidence.
So yeah, so it's still just happy and sad.
The
though.
beta lobster.
it's like
Number 2.
Breedable lobster.
the lobsters that are already designed to do well get rewarded with happiness.
Are you so like more like what is it called? Like natural selection, kind of?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that makes way more sense.
Do you
than-
understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, with that, yeah, with the
Is that
natural
we're on the same
selection
page?
thing.
Yeah.
I feel like you're more so referencing the idea that like the release of that chemical was literally physically attached to like the lobster
Yeah.
being in that spot. So it's kind of like I understand that in the sense of like I think it's supposed to connect to like how that would apply to human beings psychologically.
Well, we're getting to hear how it's going to apply to humans. So humans, the strongest humans are not the best humans. We do not want the people who are the best at punching people to be the people running our countries.
Yeah.
What do we want from the people running our countries? We want people who have high IQs, who are above average intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
We want people who work very hard. Yes.
Does he actually cite IQ? God fucking damn it.
So, and in Western society, we've done studies. People who are 3 medians above the average IQ tend to be more successful than people who are born 3 medians above the average wealth. People who have conscientiousness. Oh, okay, let's talk about personality traits. Something Jordan Peterson is a big believer in is, people are inherently born... Actually, never mind. We'll get to that later.
Oh.
Okay.
Sorry. That's a
People
lot.
are inherently born. Okay, wait a second.
There's a lot going on here. So, the lobsters, right? We want to build systems in which people who are intelligent and competent are at the top, right? Right now, Western society is kind of doing that. So when you look at government, you want government to have hierarchies to put the people who are going to manage them successfully end up at the top. If your government is working, everyone is alive, but the people who are best at running the country are the ones running the country.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So his question of how we should govern ourselves is to come up with a system with hierarchies. Hierarchies that are based on things that are actually good and work. And don't change what the hierarchy values, because then you'll put artificial things up and those things will not be good at running countries and we'll have societal collapse. Mm-hmm. Here's where Jordan Peterson spends most of his time. The philosophical question of ethics. Ethics is very simply, what should you do with your life? How should you act? Jordan Peterson's ultimate maxim on this is life is suffering, right? Mm-hmm. To believe that you should act in a way that makes you happy is stupid, because you will never be like happy. You will always experience suffering. Every moment in your life in which you are happy is still tinged with a little bit of suffering, because life is suffering. There will never be a year in which you don't feel horrible at some point. That's just not going to happen. It's not like once I get my career, then I'll feel safe and I'll feel okay, because you won't, because then you'll have the midlife crisis. And when you're old, you will feel bad because you're about to die and your body physically hurts. And when you're young, you're going to feel bad because you're anxious and the world is scary and you don't know what to fix. There is no point in your life that is wholly good. So you need to accept the fact that your life is going to be filled with suffering. What you need to do is live your life in such a way that it justifies the suffering.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay, so that's a really good idea, right? Well, how the hell do you live a life that's worth living? How do you justify suffering? What is going to justify that? Well, here's where Jordan Peterson has a very complicated answer. You need to live in a way that is in alignment with what you are. Because you are not a purely rational machine.
No.
You are an overglorified monkey. You live in a body that is defective. Your thoughts are not your own. Your thoughts are literally influenced by ancient biological drives that are designed to curb your thinking in certain ways to keep you monkey alive.
Yep.
And you need to accept this.
We need to return to monkey.
Yeah!
No?
Outside.
Reject the
Oh my
monkey.
god, I'm thinking of a fucking cold.
But you need to understand that you are a monkey. Because if you don't, if you deny it, you will be in denial of yourself. You will not be acting the way to treat yourself, and you will be miserable. You need to work along with your biological flow and not against it.
Mm-hmm.
And a big thing, remember I was talking about the personality traits?
Oh, yeah. Mm.
So something that's really big that's come up in psychology recently, that I used to think was bullshit, but it's starting to look more real, is that certain people just have certain personality traits.
Yep.
They are not socialized in. They are literally biologically rooted into you. Which is why certain medication can completely change who you are. Which is why brain injuries can make you into an entirely different person. It's because a lot of your traits are literally inside of you. And that's because having human beings with different kind of traits is good for the survival of a species. For example, you need people who can thrive in chaos.
Yep.
Because if you do not have those people, when things go wrong, everyone will be scared and panic and they won't function. You also need people who thrive in order. Because when things are running well, if people thrive in chaos, we'll just be in constant war. We need people who go, no, let's get our shit together and keep things running. Right? Mm-hmm. We need people who are very agreeable and hate conflict. Because those are the people who are good at raising children. Conflict can hurt infants. A lot of animals kick the men out of their den when the children are born because they will just kill and eat the babies. This happens all across the animal kingdom, right?
Yeah.
Conflict, if an infant's in the room, infant's very susceptible to harm, so when conflict happens, it can be bad for them. Something could go wrong.
That's why Thomas is so fucked up.
That is why there needs to be agreeable people to protect these babies. That's
Agreeableness as in the personality trait,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Disagreeableness is also very good, because you need people in society to go, you know what, fuck you, I'm doing my own thing. Because those are the people who drive us forward, and you need some of those. So there's a lot of personality traits out there, and a certain percentage of people tend to have these different traits. Jordan Peterson argues is, first of all, you need to be honest with yourself and figure out what your traits are. Figure out how you are wired. Spend your teens and your 20s figuring that shit out, because you need to know. Then, find a career path in which the traits you naturally exude are rewarded instead of punished.
Exude.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. You sound so tired.
Okay. So that, in a nutshell, is Jordan Peterson's philosophy on life.
Sexy. Alright.
And we're only at 1/10 of this lecture, yeah! No, I don't actually know how far we are in this.
They're like 30-40%.
Yeah.
So, as you can see, this is a lot. And this does not fit in a news media cycle. So you can see why they had trouble putting him in, why he constantly was clipped and sounded like a madman, because he would start talking about these things, he would get cut off midway, and everyone's like, what the hell is he talking about? What do you mean, worship the God that's inside of you? What do you mean, be like the lobsters?
Yeah, I remember that!
Hierarchies are not a socio-political construction. What the hell does that mean, Jordan Peterson? So he's kind of he's not huge, he's not ubiquitous, but people who are on the internet are kind of interested. He's starting to become a figurehead. Then 2 events that completely change his life occur. First is the Kathy Newman interview. Remember all the way back when we were talking about C16?
Yeah.
So, Kathy Newman is a BBC reporter who is pretty far left. And she had an interview with Jordan Peterson where essentially she was trying to call him out on being sexist and transphobic.
Nice.
So every time Jordan Peterson would start kind of explaining one of his nuanced takes on life, she would go, so basically you're saying women don't deserve rights. That's what you believe, right?
Yes.
A very good example of this is they were talking about the wage gap.
Uh-huh.
And she said, well, so women are paid less than men, and that is a problem, right? And he said, well, of course that is a problem. But we also need to understand why women are being paid less than men. So, your claim is that women are being paid less than men because sexism in the workplace. And that's true. There is sexism in the workplace, and women are put down because of it, and we need to address this. But we also need to understand what percentage of the difference between a man and woman's salary is accountable for this. Because a lot of women also tend to go in careers that don't make as much money. Now, why is this? And he starts talking about how certain personality traits have higher percentage manifestations in women, and the careers that reward those personality traits tend to be lower paying. And so he said, what we need to do is raise the salary of these positions, right? What we don't need to do is tell people to stop discriminating women in the workplace. We need to stop focusing all of our energy on that, because that's not actually going to solve this problem. I don't necessarily agree with this, personally, because I believe a lot of women, quote unquote, having certain traits, like he says women are higher in agreeableness because
Yeah, that was the specific one I remember.
And it's like, well, that might not be biological, that might be sociological pressure, because for centuries we've kind of divided the labor along those lines. Even though women get childbirth, it doesn't mean that's what they're designed to be good at. And Kathy Newman just didn't understand his arguments. She said, so basically you're saying women deserve to be paid less. This made Kathy Newman, yes.
Like, the whole catchphrase of Kathy Newman throughout this interview is, so what you're saying is. Like, almost all of her sentences start.
When he explained his whole take in the lobsters, he's saying, so you're saying we should base our society on lobsters. She looked very, very stupid. Right?
Yeah.
This is when Jordan Peterson gets a reputation for destroying feminists.
Oh.
Yeah! Well, he did that during the C16 thing, too, didn't he?
Not as publicly.
Okay.
When you look at the Google Analytics for when Jordan Peterson got popular, he was like mildly on the internet. It spikes the second this interview comes
Here
out.
comes the
Because this
teenagers.
is the most obvious example of liberals looking stupid and Jordan Peterson looking smart and being mischaracterized by the media. Because that is what was happening in this clip, right? And so it was the perfect example for people who believe that's what was happening all across the world. It became this like spearhead, figurehead moment. This is the same interview in which Jordan Peterson says that I would never misgender a student in my classroom, and that he believes we need to really focus on addressing sexism in the workplace, because of course that's a big problem. But he comes away with this looking like a big conservative figure.
Because he's just saying this to a feminist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that context make sense?
Yeah.
This is also when Jordan Peterson releases a book called 12 Rules for Life. So, Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist. He is a real therapist who talks to people who have problems and helps get their life together. And he's pretty good at it. He helped a lot of people. My favorite example of one of his cases is there was this guy who kept talking about like he felt like a failure because he wasn't living up to his roommate. Oh no.
No, it was already broken.
Okay.
I break
continue.
it.
He wasn't living up to his roommate, and his roommate was fucking Elon Musk.
What? Like, actually?
Yes, for real.
And so Jordan Peterson really helped this guy cope with this. There was this other woman who came to
Wait, how did he do that? Because I would be fucking lost too on that situation.
He essentially broke down the whole personality trait thing and said, look, certain people are inherently built to be successful in certain fields, and you are not programmed the same way as
No, that's bullshit. Hyperloop guy gets money and not me?
But what you need to do is stop trying to base your life around what Elon Musk did and succeed the same way he did, because that's not going to work for you.
Yeah.
You need to figure out what you want, what bends towards you, what naturally comes to you, and orient your life towards that. And he did that, and allegedly that really worked out for him.
Okay.
That's the kind of, he's a good therapist. He's also a very good teacher. Listening to his lectures that I described is fun. Because he like makes jokes and he sounds like a Kermit the Frog.
Yeah, like
And he sounds like Kermit the Frog.
yeah.
And you know how I like move my hands a lot when I speak and I'm very energetic? He does the same thing.
Oh, nice.
And he
Awesome
makes,
dances.
he makes jokes all the time. It's just a fun time in his class. His grad students, whenever they
For
like...
clarification, he makes like philosophers jokes. Like, oh, that's not very good at all. I don't know how to describe them. But
Philosophy's been such a big part of my life for so long that I forget that not everyone has these jokes inherently in their like
Yeah.
That people have other styles of humor that don't include references to Nietzsche.
Yeah.
But yeah, he is very intellectual humor. But again, because his courses are taught from a like very practical, here's how you get your life together standpoint, because he's a real clinician, a lot of people who have never thought about philosophy before could understand it, because it's not in these abstract notions, it's in very real practical examples, rooted in real neurochemistry, so it's not bullshit. And a lot of people really appreciate this, which is why a lot of people got into philosophy from Jordan Peterson. So, he is a professor who's good at talking to people, and he's a clinician. So he wrote a book, those 12 Rules for Life, is essentially just explaining his philosophy on how do you live a life you want to live. This book literally changed my life.
Oh no, Tyler. Tyler,
Yeah?
did you clean your room because of this book?
No.
Okay.
Are you sure? Because you did. There was a very sudden change of you like having to have clean.
The reason I really needed to clean my room, this was before I knew about Jordan Peterson,
Oh.
was because I was moving out of my house and I couldn't leave my room messy moving out of my house. I couldn't leave my parents with that mess. You know what I mean? And also,
So what you're saying is you had to keep your own house in order before you can move on to another one.
Yeah. That's
Wait, why is that funny?
For those, that's something Jordan Peterson literally said. For
Yes.
those of you who don't.
I'm quoting him. That's the whole clean your room thing.
Gotcha.
We'll get into Jordan Peterson as the meme. We're not there yet
I
in the
clean
lecture.
my room.
You do. You are amazing at cleaning.
Fuck yeah.
I picked up so many good habits from you, Mikayla. You are an amazing influence. Anyways, Jordan Peterson.
Anyways, Jordan Peterson.
Where was I? This book changed my life because here's what it taught me. When you are suffering, you are inherently making the world around you worse. Because people who are miserable just don't have the energy to make the world around them better, right?
Yeah.
You are a black hole of yourself, and you drag everything around you like you, because that's what humans do, because we're very tuned into each other. So, I was always obsessed with being a good person. I feel like it's probably because I was raised Christian, but like that's very, very important to me. I want to be a good person. And so I would sacrifice my happiness in order to do something that felt morally good. And this is when I learned that the way in which to make the world around me better, the way to make the people around me happier, was to actually deal with my own shit.
Yeah.
When did you read the book?
Like this March. And so, like, that's an old idea. I could have gotten that from a lot of places, but Jordan Peterson was the one who phrased it in a way I understood. He also has a few really good pieces of advice for cleaning up your life in this book. The first one that I really love is sit down and think about 10 problems in your life, and just be honest, 10 things you don't like. And you might go, I drink too much and I'm wasting my life. Well, that's a really big issue, and you're not going to solve drinking, because drinking's a lot of fun, right? Yeah. So focus on tiny things, like, my room is messy, or my door doesn't work, or I am fighting with my brother all the time and being around him makes me uncomfortable. So
Wait, your door didn't work?
No,
Wait,
these are examples.
These are examples Jordan Peterson provides.
The fucking, I have a door that's fucking broken.
And he says, when you clean the tiny problems around you, right? All of a sudden, those things will not be draining your energy. And you will be in a better place to focus on bigger things. And tackling these problems will just come easier to you. Like, schedule your day. And don't think about, like, these are the things I have to do and then I can go play video games. You need to schedule the day you want to have. Every day wake up and think, okay, I have 24 hours of life. This is cool. What do I want to do with that time? And there are things you're not going to want to do, right? Obviously, that's part of being alive. But you schedule those in and find ways to reward yourself and make yourself have the day that is the best possible day for you in that one day, best possible day for you in that week, in that year, and really think about it from that whole perspective, right?
Ooh.
You are living your day in order to make your life and the lives around you better.
Okay.
It sounds so much work.
So we're going to talk about, like, the podcast he was on and how that
We're not there.
Okay.
And I don't know too much about the podcast, so I might...
I learned about Jordan Peterson through the podcast.
We're not at the point where those are happening yet.
Okay.
The other big piece of advice is, okay, during this time, while he was working at university, he came up with a program called self-authoring. And he discovered, talking to his patients, that a lot of these people had never actually thought about their future before. They'd always just kind of gone along with the flow and figured out whatever the fuck's gonna happen is gonna happen. And this didn't lead to direct results because it was kind of a chaotic way of approaching life. So he came up with this program in which kids would sit down and write, okay, what do you want your life to look like in 5 years? Like, be reasonable, but be honest. Like, what would be the best version that you could realistically achieve in 5 years? Okay, now look at the worst thing that you think could realistically happen in 5 years.
Yeah.
And don't go, my whole parents get killed by terrorists, because of course that could happen, but that's like not likely. What are the faults you have right now that you are scared of taking over your life? And in 5 years, that's your version of hell, and you have your version of heaven. Neither of these things are likely to happen, because these are extremes. What you need to do is figure out what steps can I take to get me closer and farther away from hell, because I don't want to live there, and closer to heaven, where I want to live. Right?
Yeah.
So he instated this. There was a program where a lot of European universities forced students coming into the class to take these exams and just write about this. And this sounds like stupid guidance counselor shit, I'm gonna be honest. Right? But after a few years after these things happened, the dropout rates in these colleges drops. They reduced significantly. The average GPA in every college that adopted this program went up by like 0.5, 0.6.
Nice.
Wow.
And do you want to know what's really interesting? The change did not really seem to affect the female demographic. There was a small increase, but it was non-Western immigrant student men who benefited the most.
Oh.
And he was like, well, this is interesting. It's a lot like men aren't getting this message, and I wonder why that is, or why this idea helps them. And his original pitch, and I think this one's much more likely than the pseudoscience bullshit you're going to hear later, is that men tend to be more disagreeable. And so while people who are agreeable do well in like school systems that tell you this is a goal, obey us and you will achieve that goal, follow these rules and you'll get there, follow paths that are kind of societally set up and things will work out for you, right? People who are agreeable do well in that kind of situation. People who are disagreeable and want to say fuck you go, I don't want to deal with your pre-planned life for me. Fuck you, I want to figure out my own shit. And when these people have their own plan to follow, they're going to do better because it's something they came up with instead of something that's kind of ambiently soaked in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So why is Jordan Peterson writing so much about how to get your life together? Like, why is a academic suddenly getting so invested in like self-help material?
He's a
Is
therapist.
his life not together?
Jordan Peterson had a fucked up childhood.
Mm.
First of all, he was an alcoholic at a very young age.
Uh-oh.
Like
Like how
Are
young?
we talking single
We don't know.
digits? No.
It's single or double digits?
We don't know. He just was very young.
Okay. But like that could mean like 15 or it could mean
Based on
20.
the stories he tells, the earliest times I'm hearing is like early high school. A normal
Okay.
time for people to kind of start drinking, but he like really hit it hard. And a couple of his friends killed themselves.
Oh my sweet baby Jesus. That's
And that's why he got really obsessed with like suffering really brings the people around you down and how do you live a life that's worth living. You're starting to see how these puzzle pieces are connecting. And that is why he went to like Europe and tried to study how fascist systems evolve because he really wanted to know how mass suffering keeps popping up. So, before 12 Rules of Life come out, he is not a self-help kind of guy. His lectures are very academic. They are about the history of philosophy, right? And he's talking about them in terms of how to get your life together. But it's not like advice to you. It's advice to psychologists to help people who are mentally ill. All of the stuff back in his YouTube channel is directed towards helping people who have non-functioning lives to come to you as a therapist and how you should use philosophy to help address their problems. This is a major shift. Because now he's approaching the, like, everyone, if you're suffering, follow these 12 steps to have a better life. Does that distinction make sense?
yeah.
Yes.
Now, 12 Rules for Life, in a lot of ways, is your standard self-help book. It gives you the basic advice, but it's also based in real academic research. He talks about neurosurgeon stuff, but he speaks in a very eloquent and easy to understand way. So I would argue that it's better than most self-help books out there. But these two things happened at the same time. So at the very same time that he gets a reputation for destroying feminists, he also starts being known for being a person who gives out self-help advice. So yes.
He becomes everyone's daddy! Yeah!
What does the the internet do with this combination of things? Well, all of a sudden there are a lot of YouTube videos titled, Jordan Peterson explains why you aren't getting women. So, they will take clips from his lectures on 12 Rules for Life. They're like these kind of philosophically complex ideas, cut them down to 10 minutes, change the context, and then kind of an incel-y Gamergate group would get really into them.
No.
That's how, because that's what I knew Jordan Peterson for, is those kinds of videos.
Okay. Alright, so incels, right?
Exactly.
Let me give you a very good example of how this kind of incel audience mischaracterized what Jordan Peterson was saying. So Jordan Peterson says he has a lot of clients who are in this kind of relationship. So there are a lot of women who, when they're like 17 to 21, get in very, very bad relationships with men who don't have their shit together and are very mean and very abusive, and that fucks them up. Because living through that at that young of an age, when especially you're kind of distancing yourself from your parents and the kind of support networks you were supposed to help you out of that, really has long-term effects, right? Yeah. So what do these people usually do after this? Usually they go through a very strong self-empowerment phase. And they become very, very obsessed with their own dominance, assertion, and independence. And the next relationship these people often end up in is with a, like, more submissive guy.
Yeah!
Guys who, like, tended to be more coddled by their parents, right? Guys who will kind of just listen to whatever the woman says and there won't be a lot of conflict, and they like that.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson sees a lot of people who are in this part of their life and are in this relationship. Because this relationship is not stable. Because what this tends to happen is it breeds a lot of resentment in the guy. Because they're like angry, but they never really learned how to kind of deal with this. And so they just sit there and get angry and angrier. And then the woman gets upset because first of all, if the guy starts going to therapy and starts getting better, they're like, wait a second, why are you resisting me? This isn't good. This reminds me of this past relationship. And they get very aggressive. And then the men get very aggressive back at them. Or if they don't start getting better, they kind of just get weaker and weaker and weaker. And then there's kind of like a you're pathetic and I hate you kind of scenario. So Jordan Peterson's like, this isn't functional, right? And if you're in this kind of scenario, as a woman, first of all, you need to start trying to help empower your other partner. Because you don't want to win arguments in a relationship, because that just makes the other person sad, which affects your neurochemistry and makes you worse. Like, when you disagree with someone, you don't want to dominate your partner. That doesn't breed a happy thing. So women, even though they think they like weak men, they don't. So he says women do not like weak men. This is not good for them. Both partners need to be communicating and advocating both what is best for them, because that'll end up being what's best for each other. They clip out the part saying women don't like weak men. So a lot of people hear a lecture about how you need to be a more lobster dominant person. You need to have more dominant and disagreeable tendencies because women like less agreeable men. Which is why a lot of people start painting Jordan Peterson as this alpha male. There's this very, very uncomfortable sexualization of Jordan Peterson as a dom daddy.
Yes!
He's a Tumblr sexy man?
Yes!
Some pictures of him, so I don't really
He's up there with the once-ler and shit.
Well, no, he's the anti-onceler because this isn't Tumblr doing this. This is 4chan.
The anti-onceler.
You can erase little blushies on his cheeks now.
This is dom mode.
Are you not turned on by this?
Give him some angry eyebrows.
Yeah.
People start making like, there's this motivational Akira the Don mix where they like take inspirational things Jordan Peterson says and put it to lo-fi music. And
Wait, that was real? I thought you were just doing a bit with the Portal 2 video.
No, I was parodying that. By the way, for those of you who are interested, Sapling Station is one of my online projects. You can look it up on YouTube. I have a video that's a parody of Jordan Peterson motivational speeches with music. It's funny.
Yeah.
Listen to it.
It's like lo-fi Portal
Yeah.
2 music.
I recommend it even though I haven't watched it.
I literally watched that video not knowing you made it. To be honest.
Anyways. I like your...
There you go.
The thumbnails of these videos are Jordan Peterson sitting on a throne in this really like dominant position and like anime girls fawning over his legs. This becomes the image of Jordan Peterson on the internet. There's a whole culture of people who want to be alpha males who start listening to Jordan Peterson. And they start saying like, Jordan Peterson inspired me to work out more and become a pickup artist.
A pickup artist.
Oh, sweet baby Jesus.
You can see why this breeds a very contemptuous group on the internet. And here is really the problematic part. Because there have been and always will be incels on the internet.
Yeah.
There will always be
The universal
angry young men who have a lot of shit they need to work through. And as a result, they aren't getting female attention.
Yeah.
And not getting attention from the gender you're attracted to is psychologically hard on human beings. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's two ways you can address
It's
this.
starting to make sense again.
One is starting to, fix yourself and try to like get over your problems so you become more of a desirable person to be around.
Yeah.
And the other is to go, fuck them, it's their fault.
Oh, right.
There's nothing wrong with me, there's something wrong with the world. And I need to fucking instate a society that makes women subordinate again so they start sleeping with me.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah.
No, that's always
Jackson!
that is always going to happen.
Satire.
This is always going to happen to people because there's always going to be people in this position. This is just kind of a fact of how society is set up. And some people learn from this and grow, and some people don't, and they become very resentful. This has always been true in humanity. And we have a lot of villains who feed this resentment, and that's what they represent.
Like in Megamind.
Yes.
Holy shit, you're right.
Watch Megamind.
There's a video on Megamind on Sapling Station.
I watched and I commented, and nobody ever acknowledged that.
Tyler wouldn't let me put my
I
slideshow
liked it. It
on.
was well done.
Tyler never let me put my slideshow in the comments, so let me just show it to you later, okay, Ezri?
Okay, I'd love to. Excuse me, camera.
Sorry.
Roland, what was I talking about?
That was really good.
I literally don't fucking know. It was just
Why there's always going to be incels on the internet, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that incels are now finding a new person they like is nothing new. It's nothing big. Here's what the difference is. Jordan Peterson is smart, and he gives a lot of advice, good advice, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, there are a bunch of incels who are using Jordan Peterson level sophisticated arguments to argue that feminism is bad and women should be slaves.
Oh fuck.
Now, obviously, these are bad things, right?
Yeah.
You encounter this on the internet, and you're like, no, this is a problem, I don't like this.
Sorry.
We'll come back.
Demerit, Ezri.
I'm sorry.
Does that make sense? So all of a sudden, you'll see people in the comments making ridiculously intelligent and cohesive arguments for why women should be slaves.
Oh my god.
And this made people uncomfortable because when you encounter that and all of a sudden you intellectually can't keep up with the person making this argument, that makes you feel uncomfortable as fuck.
Yeah.
And it bothers a lot of people and gets you really mad. And so a lot of people made videos trying to debunk Jordan Peterson. There were people on campus who would run up to Jordan Peterson with like a video camera back when he was still a professor and start screaming at him, "Why do you hate trans people? Huh?"
Wait, that happened all the way back with the C16 bill, didn't it?
It did, but I'm giving you a sense.
Okay.
Right?
Alright.
And then Jordan Peterson would sit down and say, "Well, I don't hate trans people." And say, "Well, trans people got beat up at your events. What do you have to say about that?" Huh? And he's like, "Well, just because people who listen to me don't believe something doesn't mean I believe it. And I think we should sit down and have a cohesive debate," and they would scream at him. So even more Kathy Newman-esque stuff. People who critique Jordan Peterson look stupid. Which is why people who are fans of Jordan Peterson, is it still rolling?
It is still rolling.
Really start getting the sense that the people who don't know Jordan Peterson are stupid and just aren't on their level. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, another thing that a lot of people who tried to critique Jordan Peterson had trouble with is they would make a lot of straw man arguments. Because Jordan Peterson would say something like, sexism is not the main reason for the wage gap. And so people would say, well, Jordan Peterson obviously doesn't believe in the wage gap, and that's a problem. And then people would go, Jordan Peterson literally says he believes in the wage gap. Have you watched his stuff? And there became this weird rule where you couldn't actually argue Jordan Peterson unless you watched all of his stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson has a lot of content because he recorded every lecture he gave for decades and uploaded it to YouTube. So there is hours and hours of very high-level philosophy you have to sit through for these people to listen to your arguments.
And you've listened to all of them, right?
Now, why did Tyler listen to all of this? Well, let's get into this.
Shaka University.
So, no, I didn't have to do a lot of research for this lecture because I've been in this since it first started.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
I've been following it for a while.
Nice.
So, I was very in tune with like what was going on in the world of philosophy from like 2013 to 2017. Jordan Peterson, the Kathy Newman interview, this is all at the beginning of 2018, so I wasn't actually in the loop. I got into it because of my dad. This was a very complicated part in my dad's life because he just changed jobs, right? He left one government agency to go work at Homeland Security. And at the same time he switched jobs, he suffered a major brain complication.
Oh, shit.
While he was driving me home from college, he had a seizure in the middle of driving.
Oh, dude.
We had to pull over and I had to take him to the emergency room.
That's fucked.
When I was there, the doctor pulled me aside and was like, look kid, I'm going to be honest, your dad might not survive after tonight and you need to be prepared for that reality. He did survive. He was not quite the same after this incident. First of all, we always had believed he was dyslexic, and after this, he had trouble forming sentences. When you spoke to him, you had to speak slower. You couldn't really get too abstract. You had to keep things in a very physicalized space. And this was really worrying because I was kind of scared of losing my dad because I have a very good relationship with my dad, and this was kind of stressful. So he wasn't able to do his new job. He couldn't do it. He couldn't read the papers he needed to sign. So he was really scared because at his old job he had a lot of connections and had built a lot of goodwill with people, right? This is a completely new office where he knows nobody. And now he doesn't have the brain wherewithal to really build up these social networks again or to do his job. His boss, bless his soul, was a wonderful man and said, no, you're with the federal government will stick by you. We're going to wait until you get better and we'll give you very menial tasks that you can do and we'll keep your salary as if you're doing high-level stuff.
Aww.
So he couldn't really do anything at work except for sit down, blindly sign papers, and watch YouTube. My dad's always kind of leaned right. As a lot of dads do. And YouTube definitely tries to drive you to more popular things within your network.
Oh, wow.
So he would look up kind of alt-right, this conservative talk shows, right?
Yeah.
And naturally, this is when Jordan Peterson got really big. It led him into the Jordan Peterson rabbit hole. And my dad got really, really into it. He would send me emails that were like, everything I ever really wanted to teach you as a dad, this man is saying. Yes.
So is this where you get into the alt-right pipeline and how Jordan Peterson contributed to it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I did a whole essay on this.
Do you want to talk about it?
For what?
I can give a brief description.
Here, Roland,
but...
come up here.
Alright.
What'd you write your essay for?
Let's go, Roland.
I wrote it for college.
Let's go, Roland.
I need someone to move the camera. Thank you.
Oh, shit.
So, you can put it back down.
Can somebody just handhold this while I'm talking?
Yeah, so
You can-
basically the idea is
Following
that because of how the YouTube algorithm works, you can find one video by, say, someone popular like Jordan Peterson, and if you watch that, you'll get more Jordan Peterson videos.
Yes.
And how the YouTube algorithm treats that is, oh, you're into conservative content. Here's Ben Shapiro. Here's Steven Crowder. Here's Dennis Prager. And so a lot of people who watched Jordan Peterson around this time, who weren't really conservative, but just part of that sort of zeitgeist of Gamergate and stuff, were getting more into all this other conservative stuff. And that's the main idea. That's a very brief summary of how
That's what happened to me in middle school.
pipeline. Yeah. Let me see. Yeah.
And when your entire reality is surrounded with conservative propaganda, not because you live in that environment, because YouTube just feeds that to you. You get the sense that this is what the world looks like because the internet really is your view portal to what you think the world is, so that really shapes your beliefs, right? So my dad was falling into Jordan Peterson hard. And whenever I would talk to him, he would use Jordan Peterson's terminology. And so the only way I really felt like I could talk to him and communicate with him was like through talking to him through Jordan Peterson's terms. So I watched a lot of what this man had to say.
Yeah.
That is why I know everything about him. Well, as it turns out, the doctors fixed my dad and he got better.
Yeah.
In fact, not only did he get better, he got like better than he ever was.
Oh, wow.
Because he went in for cognitive work, they started putting him on medication. And like this kind of constant anxiety he'd experienced his entire life started going away.
Wow,
and he was just a
got
lot more
medication
stable
for
and
anxiety
calm.
and it helped him.
Yeah.
And so I kind of figured once this happened, the Jordan Peterson would go away, but it didn't. In fact, my dad got more into Jordan Peterson. And he would start telling me and giving me fatherly advice that fixed my problems for the first time in my life.
Oh, shit.
Because my dad is, I really like my dad, but he would give me advice like,
Me too.
the way to solve your problems in life is to pull the pants of the guy in front of you in the lunch line.
That sounds like something you would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he started giving me Jordan Peterson-esque advice. It was actually helping my life. So I was like, wow, my dad like is smarter because of Jordan Peterson. I should really check this guy out. So I got further into it. Yes.
Do you have an example of an issue of the advice?
Off the top of my head, no.
Oh, okay.
Clean your room.
Yeah.
That.
No, but that would be a good example.
Valid.
Okay, so that is why I know all this. This is why I'm qualified to really get into the meat of Jordan Peterson. And I feel like it's important for you to mention this because we're going to start getting into the big Jordan Peterson critiques. Because so far I've kind of tried to be unbiased in my opinion towards what this guy believes. Jordan Peterson all of a sudden gets this radical fan base of 4chan members. Right?
Well, I mean, we already touched on this with the
Yeah.
incels.
And these are people who make a lot of memes. Characterize Jordan Peterson, he spreads across the internet like wildfire. Right? He gets a lot of pushback from the left. Because people don't understand what Jordan Peterson is because they're only seeing him through this lens. And so people are going up to Jordan Peterson and really trying to fuck his shit up and yell at him constantly. He ends up having to leave his university because students won't go to his class because they're constantly protesting him on things he doesn't believe and didn't say. Now let's look at this from Jordan Peterson's perspective. He started as a normal academic man with some conservative-leaning beliefs, right? And then he sees a bill that literally says you are required to say certain things, and if you don't, we're going to re-educate you. And he said, hold the fuck up, this looks a little suspect.
I just want to remind everyone that that's not at all what the bill said. I remember this because I remember this being a big point of contention with a lot of people, and so they actually read the language of a bill, and again, it was just like you can't discriminate against people based off of it. Not like you have to call them by their preferred pronouns.
Like employers can't discriminate.
Like employers can't discriminate.
Like,
I really-
can't discriminate.
Okay, go ahead.
Jordan Peterson's argument is not that this is what the bill said. His argument is let's look at the language of the bill. It is very vague, right?
No, it wasn't. It was literally just like it used like examples of like not examples, but it was like you can't discriminate based off of housing based off of someone's preferred pronouns. Like it was very deliberately
It's called
bad.
the C16.
Yeah.
Okay, let me look this up.
It's weird because I think we both learned about this bill from YouTubers, right?
Yeah, but I watched people who went over the bill like word for word.
Same. It's whatever the bill said. A positive reason, Jordan Peterson's big concern was he already heard people around him saying they planned on enforcing it that way, and he lived on an Ivy League college campus, which is the most liberal place on the planet. And so of course he's going to hear a lot of people giving radical left ideas. His idea of the world is going to be affected by the fact that he's surrounded by very liberal college students. That's going to warp his perspective, right? Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So his perceived reality, he saw this as a possible problem, and he wanted to call on it. He was like, I'm not saying this is fascism. I'm not. But I'm saying this has the same flavor, and I'm worried about it. All of a sudden, the second he says that, people start screaming at him. The whole world starts fighting against him. People are trying to stop him from publishing books. People are threatening of firing from the universities. Or his perspective, he calls something out for maybe possibly being fascism. And all of a sudden, he gets slammed hard for reasons that are beyond his understanding, because he's not really understanding the way the internet reacted to him. Because he's a 50-year-old man, so why would he?
Yeah.
Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a result, he starts getting very bitter and very against left-wingers.
Yeah.
Because they're constantly fighting him, so he's fighting back. And he really starts getting worried that we're approaching societal mental illness, like Solzhenitsyn said.
the Amazon.
Right? He's like genuinely scared of this. And he's saying, look, everywhere I turn, because I live on a college campus in a liberal place, I see these ideas, these radical ideas, and we can't let these people run our country. We can't, because it will be bad. The truth is, by the time these people get to positions of political power, they tend to mellow out, right? Even Bernie Sanders, when you look at what he says when he wants socialism, he is not saying the same thing that Lenin was. They're different. They're the same word, but they are different. That distinction makes sense, I hope. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So he gets really scared, and he comes up with this idea of postmodern neo-Marxism.
Yeah.
So, he talks about how Marxism was really one of the first big man-made meta-narratives. Do you understand what a meta-narrative is?
I mean, I know what meta means and what a narrative is, so I can take some guesses.
A meta-narrative is vaguely like a cohesive system of beliefs that explains everything. Christianity is a great example of a meta-narrative.
Oh, so just like religions, essentially.
We'll get to
No.
other examples. But like, why does the world exist? Christianity has an answer. Why is there suffering? Christianity has an answer. If you fully adopt Christian doctrines, your view of the world is explained to you and you understand everything and every subject matter. It's tinged with a Christian philosophy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It is a philosophy designed to completely explain why the world the way it is and explain every aspect of it.
Yeah.
Marxism is also a meta-narrative. Because Marxism combines different fields of study, such as economics, history, literature, and explains all of these things are the way they are because history is a history of class struggle. Marx is very smart. If you are an intellectually curious person, I highly encourage you to actually read the Communist Manifesto. You'll learn a lot from it.
Thank you.
Okay.
But Marx was not advocating for the only reason anything happens is because of class struggle, but he is advocating for the thing that explains the world you're living in is a historical battle between rich and poor people that is inherent in society. His big thing is the means of production belong to people who aren't producing the labor. So of course there's going to be exploitation because the ability to produce is out of the hands of people producing. You have an entire class of people who are systematically don't have power. That's what private property does. That's his argument, okay? Mm-hmm. I disagree with it, but it's a very important argument and a very good one to understand. When people tried to implement Marxist ideology to make the world better, it didn't go well. I don't want to sound like a fucking Ben Shapiro clone, but every time socialism, the way Marx described it, was tried in a society, it didn't work. Socialism obviously expands beyond what Marx said. There's many approaches to it. Socialism as a whole isn't necessarily the devil, but socialism as Marx wrote it doesn't really work. Okay. So Jordan Peterson says, Marxism was a dominant philosophy in the West. It was very big, a lot of people believed in it, right? So when Marxism failed, intellectuals realized that they needed to change their beliefs, but they didn't want to do that. So instead they invented postmodernism. Postmodernism, according to him, is the same thing as Marxism. Well,
Wait,
Marxism...
according to who?
Jordan Peterson.
Okay.
He says Marxism is explaining history as a class struggle, right? It divides humanity between the bourgeoisie and the proletariats. Mm-hmm. Postmodernism divides you in between the races, or the genders, or the sexuality groups. It's all about resting your identity in your group. Historically, he claims that Western philosophy has been focused on the individual. Things matter on the level of the individual. By the time you're 20 or 30, your life is so peculiar and idiosyncratic that it is not like anybody else's life. Because the people you met, you're the only person who knows your exact collection of people and the way you know them. So inherently, just by existing, you have a unique perspective. And that is valuable and worth contributing to society. Alright? And so, Jordan Peterson says, when you start placing your value not in your individual nature, but in your identity group, you start running into problems. And that is what Marxism and postmodernism have in common. So, he literally believes, I've been saying this in a reasonable way, but let's look at what this literally is saying. He believes that postmodernism is Marxism in disguise. The people who believe in Marxism are simply changing their words to sneak Marxist ideology into our systems. This is fucking stupid. This is not true. To explain this, we're going to need to talk about what postmodernism actually is. Because, why does Jordan Peterson believe this? Yes.
It's Y2K, a postmodern RPG.
Postmodernism, and part of the reason Jordan Peterson has a lot of trouble understanding it, did not start as a philosophy rooted in psychology. In fact, postmodernism is not a philosophy that's interested in helping you live your life. Does that make sense?
Yes.
What postmodernism started is a form of literary criticism, which is why I feel like I have a better basis in it, because that's how I approach philosophies. Mm-hmm. Well, we have to understand postmodernism, we have to start with structuralism. So, what is a sign and a signifier? Let me say I talk about a tree, right? A tree is both the literal object that is the tree, and also the word, the thing we use, the sound, the image, the word that represents tree. And these two things are not the same thing. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So, if you were talking to someone who spoke a language that wasn't yours, and there was no reference between your two languages, they could point out a tree and say X, and you might believe that X means tree. But you can't know that. X could mean the leaves, X could mean nature, X could mean that specific tree. It's very hard to figure this out. So, signs inherently have no meaning. Tree, the word, doesn't mean anything unless you understand what isn't tree, right?
This is, I don't know, my brain's hurting, man.
Okay.
I fucking love this shit.
You don't know, the word tree means nothing unless you know that the word tree is different than the word leaf.
Yes.
Yeah.
Got it?
Yes.
Yes.
So, signs inherently have no meaning. They gain their meaning in relationship with each other. So why is this a piece of literary criticism? It's saying when you approach a text, don't think about the author's outside life and their biographical stuff. It's like Death of the Author, classic art philosophy 101. The piece itself needs to speak for itself. So if you want to know what the meaning of a piece is, you have to look at how the different parts of the text give meaning to each other. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Like, Cinderella's not a good person when you really look at the story, right? When does she do anything that is selfless? Or characteristically good?
Never. Not once.
We see her, like, doing all the chores, but that's not because she wants to, it's because she's forced to as a slave.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cinderella has zero positive attributes. But we all agree that Cinderella is the good person in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Because it's in contrast to the negative people in the story.
Yes.
Ding, ding, ding.
So that is structuralism, understanding how to critique literature. That's how this started. Well, the postmodernists really start by saying, well, this is fucking stupid. Because you can't just look within the text, because texts aren't read in a vacuum. You are already approaching the text with a lifetime of context that you're bringing to it. Everybody's going to get something slightly different out of the story because everybody has a slightly different set of context bringing to it. Remember how things only have meaning in relationship to each other?
Yes.
So your understanding of what things exist inherently understands what you get out of reading things. So things are different to all people. That's why a lot of postmodern art's all about, well, what did you see in this? Does that make sense?
Yes. So, it's not Marxists trying to spread their ideology covertly to a society to make them mentally ill.
It's not. But we'll get to why Jordan Peterson believes that. So, A logical conclusion from this kind of postmodern statement is that nothing has an inherent essence. A big tendency in Western thought, it kind of starts with Aristotle, is Aristotle believes all things had an inherent essence or purpose. A knife, because it's a knife, is designed for cutting. That is what the knife does, right? It's a knife because it cuts. A knife is created to cut. The essence of knife is cutting. The essence of fish is living life as a fish. Right? No, but think about it though. Fish keep doing the same thing, right? And a successful fish is one that swims and eats and stays where it's supposed to be and reproduces and dies. That is
This
a
all
good,
comes back to
successful
lobsters.
fish.
That's a good fish.
Fish, their essence is swimming. Or not swimming, but like being a fish, right? You understand that. That's very similar to Jordan Peterson's approach to ethics, where the way to be happy is to understand what you are and align yourself to it. You need to learn what your inherent essence is, live towards that, and that's how you live a good life. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
The whole postmodern idea is that nothing has essence. There's no such thing. Because you know what? Back when we believed the sun was a god, it was a god.
Because we made it a god.
Yes. And you could say, no, it literally wasn't a god, it was a star. But what is a star?
Something we understand
Something
today
we understand.
in relation to other objects,
Yeah.
which like they understood as God.
Yeah,
Yep.
like, you understand it. So, the star is not a giant mass of fire. That's how we conceptualize it. We conceptualize atoms. But atoms are just meaningless data out there, and we're the one that assign meaning to it.
Yep.
So the sun just exists, and we understand it as the ball of heat that keeps things going.
Yep.
Now that's a useful information to plot things and work around life, but our conception of the sun as a star, the sun is not a star, the sun is just dead matter, and we apply the meaning of star to it because that was a label that is useful. So the postmodernists aren't saying that who knows what exists. They're saying that your conception of the thing exists is actually what you're dealing with. You're not dealing with the reality. You philosophically cannot deal with reality because things, the way you understand things is how things are in relationship to each other on the conceptual level. You are incapable of dealing with reality, and that is like kind of your postmodern condition.
Fuck.
Does that make sense?
I
Yes.
guess.
So how do you live your life like that? Well, a big thing the postmodernists kind of point out is that you need to understand how the world you live in shapes the meaning of the world around you.
Uh-huh.
And you can kind of see why postmodernism started getting popular at the same point we had the media revolution. Because television and radio and mass media literally changed how we understood the world.
Yep.
The world became a different place when we had more access to it. Now you might think, well, the world was always like this, you just learned about it. No. No. Because people learned about the world, they acted differently.
Yeah.
That made the world into a different place. So people's knowledge of the world inherently changed what the world is. So you cannot understand the world unless you understand how it is understood. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Are we done with postmodernism yet?
No.
Ah!
You can see why people have trouble talking about postmodernism because it's a very complex and convoluted thing. And the people who write about postmodernism tend to be French.
Oh.
And, okay.
Yeah, ew.
Do any of you read philosophy? This isn't like a joke.
No.
Just like
Nah.
genuine, like,
No, I'm sorry.
Nope.
You read
No
about it
background.
and then tell
Persona
me about
3,
it, so
the
kinda.
French philosophers have a writing style that is just difficult. Because in America, philosophers really emphasize being readable. Because America is kind of like a populous country. That's just a big part of what we believe in as a society. And that's not the same way in France. They are much more elitist. It's just been part of their culture longer. So there's kind of an attitude of if you can't understand this, it's because you're not meant to. And so they write long paragraphs, convoluted language. So postmodernism is already complex, and now it's being written in very complex ways, so it's very hard to access. And it's outside of Jordan Peterson's framework, so no wonder he's having trouble with this, right? Anyways, if nothing has an essence, how do you live your life? And the postmodern answer to that, in essence, is you shape the world around you to work for you. Are you alright, Ezri?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. So, if the world isn't going your way, if you are miserable, what you need to do is change the context of the world so that the world starts working in your favor. Because the world as we conceptualize it is just that, a conceptualization. So if everybody's miserable, there's probably something wrong with our mass conceptualization of the world. So, Peterson's big problem with this is that you don't understand the world. You are a 18-year-old college student. You don't have your life in order. You haven't cleaned your room. And
I'm cleaning my room.
you are a
asshole.
monkey. So instead of going, I hate hierarchies, I hate inequality, why don't we change the way we conceptualize of the world so that the world accommodates me? You should go, there are biological limiting factors that aren't socio-political constructions, and you need to align yourself to them. And once you start aligning yourself to them, you'll start to understand that the socio-political structures around you are not made up, they're direct reflections of those biological drives. And that is the big contention point between Peterson and postmodernism.
And you can understand why literally no one understood why he was calling things postmodernist.
Well, Jordan Peterson doesn't understand this, because this is not what Jordan Peterson says. This is me interpreting his attack on it, because Jordan Peterson doesn't understand postmodernism.
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson's actually very good on this. He explains what he believes postmodernism is. And he believes postmodernism is the belief that there is no correct interpretation of reality because anything can be anything. And you can see how postmodernism kind of sounds like that.
So subjectivists?
Yeah.
Okay.
He characterizes postmodernists as subjectivists, who believe that there's no correct interpretation of the world. Everything's whatever we make it up to be, so why don't we make it up to be without capitalism? And he's saying, well, that's stupid because you can't make up the world. And postmodernists are like, well, that's not what we're talking about. So, finally, Jordan Peterson is making really stupid statements online that people can critique him for. And this is when the big wave of smart leftist YouTubers fucking crucify Jordan
Yeah! H-bomber
Contrapoint
guy.
comes out, right? And Contrapoints makes a video of Jordan Peterson and basically says he believes that postmodernism is a Marxist conspiracy. This guy is fucking nuts. Ha ha ha. Also, I want to fuck him because I'm Contrapoints.
Philosophy too.
Just to give Contrapoints due credit, obviously she said more than that, but she did kind of dismiss all of Jordan Peterson's earlier work as like standard motivational speaking stuff that of course she agreed with. And I really think, as you can see from this lecture, there was a lot more nuance there, and I kind of think she skipped it over, so I was just calling her on it. Obviously, Contrapoints is awesome. Her video on Jordan Peterson's awesome. You should probably watch it if you've gotten this far and are interested in Jordan Peterson. Alright. Then Big Joel makes a video.
Oh yeah, right.
Big Joel actually makes a very interesting point that I think really gets to the core of why a lot of people can't vibe with Jordan Peterson. And he says that Jordan Peterson's big thing is that you need to get your life in order before you change the world, right? Because if you try to change the world when you are miserable and suffering, you will make the world a miserable and suffering place, because what you do is a reflection of who you are. So, you're angry that the world isn't equal, and that makes sense. That sucks. But you need to get your own shit together so when you try to affect the inner mechanisms of how the world works, you don't fuck it up. And Big Joel is saying, well, no one is ever not fucked up, right? You will always have problems. You will never be perfect. So if you obsess over I have to perfect myself before I'm allowed to change the world, nobody will ever do anything, and we live in a democracy in which you need to go out and do something. You need to go out and have your voice heard. And your voice is imperfect. Of course it is, because you're human. But when a bunch of people all speak out their voices, we find the best solution within all of these ideas and we make it work. So it is your obligation to share your opinions, even if you think you're stupid, because those opinions could be useful in combination with other things, because that's how democracy functions. Yes?
Oh, I was just waving my hair, I'm sorry.
So, a big thing Big Joel and Contrapoints make a big deal of is they're trying to separate themselves from Kathy Newman. So they say, look, Jordan Peterson has a lot of motivational things about how to get your life together, and we agree with all of those. We just disagree with his not liking the West thing. And it's like, you can't do that. Because these two things are so intermeshed together. Like, the reason he doesn't feel uncomfortable socialism is so embedded in his beliefs here, to separate them like that really mischaracterizes Jordan Peterson. But this gives a lot of people on the internet, kind of the safety network of, okay, I don't have to worry about Jordan Peterson because they've revealed him to be a sham. Something also worth pointing out is that Jordan Peterson is having mental issues. Jordan Peterson's mental health has been massively deteriorating, and not like from a psychological perspective, like his brain is starting to get biologically fucked up.
Ooh.
In fact, he had something really similar to what my dad had, which is kind of an interesting link here. But he started having problems when he was writing this book. There was a month where like his brain injury was starting to like kill him, and he couldn't write, and he said it was the hardest chapter he'd ever written in his life because of it. And things kind of get progressively worse. He gets progressively more manic as this goes on. And this is the worst time for this to happen, because this is the first time he becomes culturally relevant, and he's facing more pressure than ever before, and he's less equipped to deal with it than ever before. He's having a harder time making cohesive arguments than ever before. And this is when the whole world is watching him, and his legacy is being cemented. That makes sense.
Yeah.
This is also, Jordan Peterson kind of starts buying into his own mythology. So he really kind of starts believing that he is this alpha male kind of character.
Oh, Christ.
And part of that comes with the all-meat diet.
Oh yeah, the all-meat diet.
Because you need to increase the mass, so you have to eat all meat.
Oh,
to
fuck, bless you.
regulate yourself. And he exercises a lot, gets really fucking fit, eats just meat, he puts his daughter on the same diet.
Oh no, I thought his daughter put him on the diet.
It might be the other way around.
Alright.
I know less about this because you were the one who taught me about it and I had to look it up after the fact. But anyways, he starts going the all-meat diet around the same time as he starts having these brain deterioration things. Back to postmodern neo-Marxism. So, here's the big question. Why postmodernism? And why Marxism? Because you understand why Jordan Peterson would be philosophically opposed to postmodernism. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And we also understand why Jordan Peterson would misunderstand postmodernism and mischaracterize it. That makes sense. But why would he believe that it is a Marxist conspiracy theory? Where the fuck did that come from? Because postmodernists and Marxist philosophers debate each other all the fucking time. They disagree on everything because Marxism is a meta-narrative. It says the world is the way it is because of a certain thing that's outside of your control. And postmodernists are like, the economy's made up. It doesn't really affect anything. It's all about your perception. And Marxists are like, no! That's kind of that debate, right? But the truth is, most postmodern philosophers are really fucking socialist. They lean very, very far left. So why is that?
Why are
is there
you
such-
whispering?
Oh no. Why is there such a correlation between people who kind of like Marxist ideology and people who believe in postmodernism? Because the postmodernists are very big in believing that the state of the world you are in affects reality itself. Right?
Yes.
We went over this, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Derealization shit. Continue.
We're living in a capitalist age. Capitalism really started happening once we got out of feudalism and changed the mode of economy.
Yeah.
So we no longer have a class of royals predestined to run the economy. It's now whoever can come up with the best idea. So the best people theoretically are selected on top. And that is a radical shift in how wealth is distributed in the West. That difference makes sense, right?
Yes.
That's why capitalism was considered a very liberal idea back when there were monarchs. That is what we call early stage capitalism. Back when single countries started becoming capitalist and reorganizing how things work within their borders along these kind of capitalist lines.
Mm-hmm.
Around the time the world wars ended, right? The globe became way more interconnected. And we enter late stage capitalism, where capitalism is no longer contained within countries and managed and run by governments. Corporations are multinational. They exist outside of sovereignty bonds. So you don't pledge your allegiance to the corporation that's patriotic. You have to manage your negotiation between your work and your country, and those can be conflicting things. That's why nationalism arguably really goes away once we get multinational corporations, because your country and your work are no longer tied together. We are living in a world run by multinational corporations that are affecting how governments run, and they're constantly fighting each other, and they are affecting what media people all across the globe consume. Everything in the world is inherently tied to the motivations of corporations because corporations own the means of production. And corporations have motives because of course they do, because they're entities with motives and they don't act like normal people. So the motives of corporations that are creating the products literally shape what we believe and change how we think about society.
We all got a platypus controlling us.
We all have a platypus controlling us. So this is kind of the postmodern perspective of capitalism, right?
Mm.
This is the postmodern condition, you might say. Where, yeah, no, look at that. So, a lot of the people who write about this aren't a fan. Because if you're going to write a 2,000-page political treatise, you're not going to write it about, the world's going great, and here's why. Because why would you be motivated to write that much? People make big philosophical treatises when they think there's something wrong with the world, they have a unique perspective on it, and they need to comment. Because postmodernism is a philosophy that's really tooled for how capitalism is literally changing how we reflect reality, the kinds of people who are motivated to write a lot about this subject, looking at it from this lens, tend to see this as a problem. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Postmodernism is not inherently anti-capitalist, but all of the big postmodern writers are anti-capitalist because those are the kinds of people who are interested in this line of thought. And as a result, postmodernism really takes an anti-capitalist shape, which is very easy to relate to Marxism. So Jordan Peterson is trying to understand why a bunch of people who are postmodernists are Marxists, and he comes up with the idea that they're the same thing, and they're not. They just have this really convoluted reason for crossover. So, Jordan Peterson gets more and more people fighting him, gets more and more buying into the image that has been created for him. And now he's making full-on conservative statements. That feminism is ruining America and fucking over young men. So yeah. He releases this big video about how white privilege is a myth. And no, Jordan.
That was on PragerU, right? He's on PragerU now.
He's too far gone.
And you're like, it's really sad because this person who has originally had this very nuanced take in life and became popular because he didn't fit into the conservative mold he was supposed to when he opposed a bill that was for trans rights. The whole thing that made him special was that he was different than other conservative spokesmen. And now, the fact that people perceived him as a conservative spokesman has turned him into a conservative spokesman. Which, I mean, how postmodern can you fucking get? Jordan Peterson's health gets worse. He goes to a special hospital in Russia. They give him the wrong kind of blood in the transfusion.
No.
Really fuck him up. And then he has a revelation that he needs to write 12 more rules for life.
That's too many rules.
He writes a book called Beyond Order, which is supposed to be an addition piece to 12 Rules for Life, because he didn't quite understand everything back then.
Wait, did he write this before or after?
After.
Okay.
I mean, he worked on it before, but it came out after, and there's a lot of influence after, and you can clearly tell he's more manic writing this.
Okay.
Beyond Order is actually a really good book. It is surprisingly intellectually coherent, and it's essentially saying the same things this book does, but in a more aggressive way with more Dom male flavoring. There's nothing wrong with this book. If you want to read really horrible Republican shit in it, you can. That's not what it's saying. It's just easier to come away with that interpretation of this book than it was with this book.
Yeah, because he's now a spokesman while he's writing this.
Yeah, but he doesn't actually put any of those ideas into it. Something you should really understand about Jordan Peterson is in his video about why white privilege is a myth, he never actually argues that. He says, white privilege doesn't exist, right? And here's why. Let's talk about postmodernism. And then he goes in a rant about postmodernism and never actually connects the two things. He just talks adjacent to it. An example is he talks about why feminism is ruining America, and a big argument he has is look at the myth of Sleeping Beauty, right? The story of Sleeping Beauty is about a woman who is coddled by her parents and as a result can't function in the world. She has a love affair for 5 minutes, the prince walks away and she literally suffers PTSD because she can't handle the one good person going away from her. This is a person who is protected too much by her parents and cannot function in the world. Right? And so when the prince walks away, Sleeping Beauty goes to sleep to never wake up again. She pricks her hand on the needle. There's a pretty clear evidence where... Okay, so Sleeping Beauty overprotected by her parents. She can't function in the world, pricks her hand on the needle, goes to sleep, never wakes up again. Because people who are overconditioned by their parents, experience the world, can't handle it, and either they kill themselves or die because they can't thrive and function in the world. Right? That's his argument for what Sleeping Beauty is archetypally about. And then what happens? The prince comes and rescues her. Sleeping Beauty has no agency. And he says a common feminist critique of this is, why the fuck is the man saving her? Why can't she save herself? And he's like, you're missing the point. Because the prince and Sleeping Beauty are archetypally the same person. The Sleeping Beauty represents the feminine side of your psyche, and the prince represents the masculine side. And what happens when you're overprotected by your parents is that you adopt more archetypally feminine characteristics. And what you need to do is work on stuff like like disagreeableness, standing up for yourself, things that are traditionally associated with male. Not that these things should be associated with male, but they are, and that's why it's like this. So the prince is really representing the way in which you get out of this depression and wanting to kill yourself is to stand up, fight your dragons, which is why the prince has to kill Maleficent in dragon form, slay your dragons, and rescue yourself.
Man,
So,
Kingdom Hearts is deep.
his arguments for this, he claims, and this is why feminist theory is bad. He never argues why feminist theory is bad. He argues why feminist reading Sleeping Beauty is bad. Just to clarify yet another thing, so this isn't even really a good argument against the feminist reading of Sleeping Beauty, because there was no sexism intended in its original meaning, there's still, an impact. And you have hundreds of stories that show women in passive roles and men rescuing them, even if it's not about men rescuing women, hearing that narrative over and over is going to have, societal effects. And also the fact that we just accept that we're going to characterize certain traits as masculine and feminine is problematic, and obviously that's how the culture that wrote the story viewed it, but that doesn't make it, above critiquing those ideas and where they came from. Just wanted to make sure. I figured that was implied, but it's good to vocalize things like this. And this is why feminist theory is bad. He never argues why feminist theory is bad. He argues why feminist reading Sleeping Beauty is bad. But the people who have trouble putting together arguments, because they're already going into this wanting an excuse to hate feminists, see a very intellectually complex thing. This is not easy to follow, right?
Yeah.
And I honestly feel like I'm explaining it a little better than Peterson does, because and so it's easier to follow. But when it's hard to follow and you really have to understand Jung to get how he's getting to these ideas, it is easy to think, wow, this is a really complex and intellectual argument. And he comes to the idea that feminism is bad, so feminism must be bad. And Jordan Peterson believes feminism is bad because he's a misunderstanding of feminism. And this is where you get him making claims about white privilege and then not saying anything about it, and then people saying, I don't believe in white privilege because of his Jordan Peterson lecture. So, when Beyond Order tried to be published, the first publishing company that happened, a bunch of their employees quit because of its transphobic messages. There is nothing transphobic in the book Beyond Order at all, but here's why that was a good idea. Jordan Peterson is no longer an individual in the psyche of our culture, right?
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson is a symbol of a very aggressive incel movement. He has equated those two things. And this concept of Jordan Peterson is actually slowly possessing Peterson's life in this very Jungian sense. So anything Jordan Peterson says, even if he's saying it as an independent agent, is going to be understood culturally through the lens of Jordan Peterson, the conservative concept. So Jordan Peterson really can't say anything without inadvertently supporting things he doesn't necessarily agree with, which puts him in a really awkward stage. That is why Jordan Peterson is unlike any other philosopher in the modern age. He's a clear product of our times and the internet, and he's a great warning about what happens when you are too intellectual and can't really understand the social and art cues around your life.
Did you really just fucking say the problem with Jordan Peterson is he's too smart?
Alright. And that, my friend, is Jordan Peterson. How are all of your brains feeling?
I know.
I
know things.
Pretty good. Pretty good.
So, you skipped over the coma, I noticed.
I don't know as much about that, so do you want to go into the coma?
There's not much in it. Basically, the problem was when he went to the Russian hospital to get a blood transfusion, he essentially went into a coma and woke up, I forgot, I think it was like 6 months later or something. So what happened was that when that sort of leftist movement came along and you had Big Joel and ContraPoints making videos about Jordan Peterson, all of a sudden he became culturally relevant in like a negative sense, and then he sort of disappeared, and then the next time we heard about him, it was, oh, he was in a coma for 6 months and he's writing a new book.
Yeah.
And that's basically what brought Jordan Peterson back into the limelight, and then that's all that happened with
Jordan
him.
Peterson's pretty much out of the limelight now. He's no longer an intellectual force that you really have to reckon with. But I feel like whenever people talk about Jordan Peterson, because his beliefs are so complex and so controversial, they will only talk about him in terms of validating his beliefs or critiquing them. And I feel like I'm scared that humanity won't actually get the lesson out of Jordan Peterson that they needed to do, that they needed to learn, because Jordan Peterson is a complex cultural figure, and I really wanted to focus my lecture on explaining that. And Jordan Peterson is a cultural phenomenon.
I feel like you did a lot of a better job explaining this now than you did in the car ride when we were talking about it that one time.
Well, I had hours to prepare for this, and I was
Yeah.
off the cuff in a car ride.
Yeah. And you were trying to explain Carl Jung, and I got like almost nothing from it.
All right, yeah, that's it. Shaka University, be a lobster,
Woo!
dominance. The Jordan Peterson thinks women should
Don't be
play.
submissive and breathable.
Be like the lobster.
Don't ever think